Hi, welcome everyone. We have Dr. Judy Brownell. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Delighted, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting
So,
me.
yeah. Judy, you've made huge contributions over your life. Not to embarrass you too much, but you've made huge contributions over your life to the field of listening, and to the field of hospitality services, and to the field of business in a lot of ways as well, right?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be in some good places with some great people and do things that I love to do. So that
Yeah.
worked out
Awesome.
well.
Sorry. Okay, so I wanted to know, like, before we go into all of your contributions, how did you get there, and what was the world like before you had to develop things? What kind of voids were you seeing? Why did you feel you needed to contribute there specifically as well?
Listening has long been neglected in the language arts. We have this graph that we like to show where there's reading and writing and speaking and listening, and certainly in the in the public schools from the time someone enters first grade, there's a lot of emphasis on reading and then on writing and on speaking, but very, very little on listening. And in my first life, I was in an education program, a teacher education program, and I was observing students, teachers. And there was I think it was probably a seventh grade teacher who was really frustrated with her class. And she would just shout, listen, just listen. And I was sitting in the back observing and thinking, that's not going anywhere. Her just shouting, listening at these students is not changing their behavior one little bit. In fact, it's just kind of provoking them. So I realized even back then, even before I got into much more than a broad interpersonal communication, there was really a need for educators in particular to have some idea, some direction as to how they could help students listen, because I think that it opens so many doors for everyone, both the speaker and the partner.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so then from that period, that sort of trigger there, did that direct you somewhere, or?
Well, it did. Then I didn't immediately do anything with that, but I was teaching at Binghamton University. I hadn't yet joined Cornell. I've been with Cornell a long time, so
Right.
this was like early on, and we got a request to do some consulting and training at a local large corporation, and I said, sure, I'll do that. And I heard that they wanted someone to teach listening, to help managers listen. What had happened was they had done a needs analysis, and employees had said managers don't listen. And so I was sent in to fix the problem. The problem was the managers, of course, didn't think they needed any work with listening at all.
Right.
If asked, they would all say, oh, my listening is just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know what my employees were talking about. So I spent a day with them realizing that again, we're kind of going at this in the wrong, or we're going at it in a less productive manner. So I then did some more research with the employees, trying to figure out what they meant when they said their managers didn't listen. And
That's really
was
good.
really interesting.
Yeah, that's really good. You listen to the employees to know why,
why their managers didn't listen. So they meant very different things. And some meant that, well, they say they have an open door, but when I go in to talk with them, they're doing 100 other things. They're filing, they're looking at back then there weren't cell phones as prevalent, but they're not paying attention, they're not focusing on me. In other cases, not listening meant that they promised they'd do something and they didn't follow through on it. So they weren't listening. They don't care. They, didn't do what they said they'd do, and here I am in the same situation.
Wow.
Other times it was just really a nonverbal thing, that they're not listening because they're not looking at me, they're not focusing on me. And of course that carries over into the hospitality industry. So I did some more research, and it was really interesting that we found that different managers, if we looked at their team of employees, the employees were pretty consistent, but each manager had somewhat different issues. And that evolved into my model, which is a 6-component model of listening, where we find that listening really can be, for the purposes of training and education, can be looked at in a very behavioral way. And that was the first time we really had just a structure that educators could use to assess and then to very directly teach to or train to the the behavior, and then to do a post assessment and see whether any progress had been made. Because the other problem with listening is, because it's not observable, no one really can tell whether you're listening or not. And we find perceptions of listening being particularly important in service industries, of course.
Yeah, really good.
So that developed over time, and got fine-tuned. A lot of other people took the model and did research with it. So I was very fortunate to have other people validating the components of the model.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so the Hurrier model is what you called it. It's like in an acronym sort of thing, but
right. And had I realized it would sound so weird when you said it, I would have used different letters.
Right.
But at the time, we were trying to be descriptive, and that works.
Yeah. So it's the first model. There wasn't any other model before that one came out.
Not a model that directly helped educators. There were components of listening before that. Larry Barker and some of the other, Andy Wolven had, Wolven and Coakley were some of the first that preceded me, and people who were really interested, who were basically educators interested in education. But they were doing listening purposes, that you listen to and to be entertained, you listen to enjoy something, you listen to understand something. And so it was a kind of a very different approach to how listening is taught. So there were other ways of looking at listening, but no one had looked at it in exactly the same, pre-test and survey, teach to the problem, and then post-test and see whether or not.
So one of the things I was seeing when I was looking at your model is it relates back to what you were saying earlier about they didn't care, right? That our bosses didn't care. And I think one of the things you have in your model that it's not actually written there, but it's underneath it all, is you have to care about listening in some way.
Absolutely. Of the one of my colleagues, his name is Manny Steele, he has what he calls the law of listening, which is that listening equals not only ability, but also willingness. And that was his way of communicating the fact that almost everyone can improve their listening. And I have to say that to my classes, you just pay attention to it. If you just care more about your listening, you will automatically improve significantly, because it's important to you and you're focusing on it. And it's not necessarily rocket science. It's not like doing a front flip. It's your focus. And I have a friend at Cornell whose name you wouldn't mind is Giuseppe Pizzati, and everyone loves him. He can hear names of a class of 40, and they can just introduce themselves, and he can go around and repeat all those names. And we're like, what are you, how do you do that? And he said, I just care about them. When I look at them and I see them and I hear them, then I don't forget. Students come to him with problems, and he remembers years later. And he's just, of all the people I've ever met, he really is one of the most striking in his ability to really focus, and it's because he cares about the people that he does remember them.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so when your Hurrier model first landed, it came out as just a project, a book, a thesis. How did it start out?
It started out helping me with training. So I developed a survey that I always gave then. And the other piece of that, which was really helpful, and I think others then used it as well, is that I would give the managers, and I did mostly training with managers because I was in a school of management. They would take a survey, a 40-item, 30-item self-assessment. And then I would give the exact same questions, a companion survey, to selected like 5 to 10 of their team members. And then when they came into the training situation, they would be able to compare their self-assessment to the means of their colleagues or their team members. And that was all that it took, because always, without almost exception, I would say in 93, 94% of the cases, managers overestimated their listening ability. They thought they were much better listeners than were their managers. So the first use of the model was in the training. People immediately wanted to do research on it, just to do factor analysis, just to make sure that they were distinct groups. And I did some, and it did turn out, but in some ways at that time I really didn't care how valid the research was, because it was working in a very pragmatic way, and it was being really helpful. And managers were saying, "Oh my God, it's empathy. I'm not communicating empathy. In my mind, I think I'm empathic, but I'm just not. People don't think I care because I'm not looking at them, or because I'm doing other things." Yeah. And so it's the perceptions of listening are really important for the relationship, even if they may not be for the understanding. It's hard to tell how someone is feeling and get the emotional component of the message unless you also are focusing on them and making them feel comfortable in what you're doing.
Really good.
I wrote a book a while ago. My first book was Building Active Listening Skills, and I kind of tried out the model there. And then I wrote a book, Listening Attitudes, Principles, and Skills, that is still probably one of the few listening textbooks, and is being widely used now. And then just recently, last year, I wrote another book because I believed that people in the professions, all the professions, law and education and healthcare, really benefit from listening, but it's not really a part of their curriculum or their courses. So this book was for the teacher to be able to take just sections of the model that apply particularly to the group of professionals they're working with, and they can spend a day, a week, whatever they want, and help them in that regard. So. Yeah,
really nice. One of the before we get into your model a little bit, one of the things I was seeing in your model is it struck me as a little bit odd, and I want maybe you have interwoven within the listening, and I think it's really great. Is that it's not just about getting the message from the other person. It's not just about hearing them. It's not just about listening. It's also about making the other person feel like they're heard. And in your model, that's that holds equal weight almost to actually getting the message, is making them feel like you got the message. And even beyond just the fact that there might be a miscommunication, and if you echo back the message, they might be able to correct, no, you didn't hear me correctly. But even beyond that, it's just it's like an interpersonal thing. So
absolutely
right. So why were you throwing that in just because of the employees, because you wanted them to make them feel heard, or it's a part of listening itself, or why were the two mixed?
Well, I think it's a part of listening itself. It's an important part of that. If you think of the people that you really respect and admire and want to be around, often they're very good listeners, because listening is such a compliment. If you listen to someone, you're saying to them that you believe what they have to say is of value, and people respond really positively to that by speaking more and developing a relationship. And I think it's the relationship that becomes really important, and the way that you respond to what you hear is what gives the other person a sense that that they've been understood. And it's often that we go away and say to ourselves, well, good luck with that. I don't think they really understood what I meant, because people don't stop to even ask questions. I think even the art of questioning and probing is really something that.
I cut out. I don't know if it's me or you.
Up there. The technology that we're using now certainly have an impact on listening. And I've been incorporating some of that in my books as well, because I think that there will be more distance communication rather than less as we go through time. But the last component of my model, which is very unusual for listening models, is how you respond to what you hear. Emotional intelligence is part of what I think is important to teach. Yes, I think that people need to feel heard in order for communication to be effective.
Yeah, I honestly do see a lot in relationships, friendships, marriages. Like the major issue is people don't feel like they're heard, even if the person is listening. That's like the one thing that's hurting the relationship. Yeah,
for sure. I do a program on gender communication, and certainly listening is still gender linked. Nobody wants to hear anything is gender linked, but it is. In terms of where people fall on the scales and how they perceive themselves. And I work with leadership, and that also plays in. It's not always significant differences, but I think women have just been, most women, and it's stereotypical, it's a stereotype, but it's also been studied and proven still true, is that women have a lot more facial expressions, a lot more leakage of emotion, non-verbally, and in listening, that's a component that does make a difference.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm trying to work on as well, getting the nonverbal side of it. Yeah, it's really hard.
Women smile more. Women generally have better eye contact with both men and women. So
yeah. So can we get into the model a little bit? So the first stage of your model is hearing, but I think you wanted to call it attention instead, something like that.
Yeah, I certainly would not have called it hearing, if I were to do it over again. But I think it's what you pay attention to is a decision, and sometimes if you don't get that right from the very beginning, then then the whole process changes. So I think that people who don't feel heard, the first thing you need to do is pay attention to them, to really focus on what they have to say. Even in larger groups and crowds, I mean, you need to know what it is that you want to know.
Yeah.
And so
like this thing, if I was looking at my phone while I was listening to you, even if I was paying attention to you, that's not good because you feel like I'm not.
Right. Absolutely. And it's flipped really, because and we might get to this, but being in hospitality and looking at service settings, and I'm doing a lot of work now too in healthcare. But I think that it's sometimes the case in service settings that you're saying that you're looking at emotional labor. You're looking at asking people to listen, to focus, to smile, to be on call, regardless of how they feel. So it's like impossible for a person to always be at the top of their game, and always. So you've got it from both sides. You've got people who are listening but don't look like they're listening, and then you have people who aren't listening who have the nonverbal down. So you've got the two sides of that.
Oh wow! I was just recently with a couple where the wife was saying, "Oh no, I don't know what he's saying, but I'm listening to his vibe." I'm like, "Oh okay."
Yep.
Yeah.
And when you know someone well, sometimes there's a shorthand, and a third person won't know what's going on because the two people know each other well, so they're not really saying everything they are communicating, and and then you make assumptions about things. The assumptions are really so. So it starts with hearing. Hearing starts with what you focus on, what you pay attention to, and it's affected by a lot of things. I mean, one of the things that I think students suddenly realize is, like, right now, what is affecting your attention? Why can't you focus on me as a teacher in front of the room? Is the air conditioner loud? Are you sitting in the wrong spot? Is there somebody next door who's surfing? Did you not get any sleep? Are you hungry? There are all sorts of external and internal things that are constantly affecting our ability to focus, and recognizing those and controlling the ones we can when it matters. Is helpful.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about the guessing and the projecting, and that's not in this stage of the model. This stage is not the guessing. No.
Right. No, I skipped.
Okay. No, it's all right. Yeah. Okay. So can we move on to the next stage, or is there a little bit more nuance you want to talk about here?
No, when I'm looking at healthcare, sometimes we look at senior living, and people sometimes lose their hearing and don't want to admit it. So sometimes when you're talking with an older adult and they're nodding, they aren't getting everything, and then it goes back to the later in the model, but they're filling in. And so I think sometimes it's really important to really think about your listener, think about what they need from you as a speaker in order to have communication be effective. Hearing really is part of it. And, the distance you are, when we have a lot of diversity in our organizations now and, life, and sometimes, accents, the ways of speaking, are affected, and it's harder to listen to people who are soft-spoken. So there are a lot of things that are going on that, to be aware of and to try to take into consideration as the communication is going.
Yeah, you touched on this just a little bit right now, where like there's a shared responsibility between the speaker and the listener to make the conversation work, right? So you talked a little bit on the responsibility of the speaker to make sure that the person is actually able to listen, right?
Yes, and when we teach presentational speaking, we always say, relate your topic to the listener. Here are some things you do. So the speaker has some responsibility, but what we're trying to say with listening is that, you also have responsibility. And sometimes, so often, people are in situations where they really don't even intend to listen. And that is so dysfunctional because the speaker doesn't know that the listener has no intention of really paying attention and working. And listening takes a lot of energy. And you take mental energy. You take almost more mental energy to listen well than you do to speak, because when you speak, you kind of know what you're saying and you're just gathering things cognitively to project. But listening takes a lot of analysis and thinking and putting things together.
Right. Yeah. Both definitely take a lot of. I'm not sure where have you seen a little bit of the cognition on how much more energy and effort it takes in the listening than the speaking?
I haven't, but I'm sure there are different situations in listening that take more or less. We have a lot of effect from listening anxiety. That while there's speaker anxiety, there's also listener anxiety as well. And when you get in a stressful listening situation, that takes even more energy. And when we move to the next component of the model, the next components of the model, I'll mention that again. There's some situations where the anxiety makes a big difference.
Okay, yeah. Just before we move on, then I also wanted to touch on a little bit the idea that the listener isn't paying attention, and it's maybe the responsibility of the speaker as well to see if they're paying attention or not. Because I know that happens to me a lot, where it's like someone's trying to talk to me. I'm like, wait, hold on. I'm not listening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a second.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, it is the speaker's responsibility, and so often, the example, of course, being a faculty member, that happens all the time, is you've got all your books in your hand, you're ready to go out the office door when a student comes in and wants to tell you some story. Maybe it's a reason why they weren't in class 2 days ago. But I know personally, I am not in a frame of mind to listen to them. I'm thinking about distributing the papers. I'm thinking about whether my TAs are there, whether we have chairs in the room, and I'm just not ready to listen. And I actually was proud of myself that I began to say, I really can't, stop. I really can't listen to you, because most people think that that's the rude part, but really the rude part is listening when you're not listening, looking like you're caring and listening when you're not.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Has their own, common situation where that's most likely to happen. And families too, that happens a lot in a family situation that where people listen.
Yes, I get that too. It's a really good point. Yeah, my son comes to me sometimes and he just starts talking to me about some game that he's playing or something. I have no idea. I'm not in the right mind. It's like, wait 1 second. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next part. It's understanding the you in the Hurrier model.
Yes.
Right. And so just a little bit of background, what does that touch on?
And that's actually one of the most traditional listening components. It's analogous to reading comprehension. It's just understanding what's said, and and being able then to act on it, and to get the accurate meaning. And there too, you have language issues and understanding. You have people using different words, people not being precise in their language, and then you're going off in another direction. We have acronyms for all sorts of things, and sometimes you allow someone to just keep talking even though you have like no idea what it stands for and what they mean. And we always think to ourselves, oh, well, when they finish talking, then I'll go back and try to figure it out. But that often doesn't work, because then they've moved on and you've lost part of what was going on. So, and people do have anxiety that interferes with their ability to understand. If it's really important, sometimes it's really hard you just get some
chatter. Chatter.
interference in your brain that the anxiety is causing. And so you're really not able to focus, and then you're not able to understand as well. Anytime someone who doesn't like numbers, is talking to someone who does. One of my sons is a mechanical engineer, and it's like, hold it, no, you lost me. Oh, wait, a couple sentences after you started, and sometimes people just are embarrassed, perhaps, don't really want to spend the time to stop someone and say, let's start at the beginning. Let's see if I understand what you said. I want to be a good listener, but I don't have the background that I need in order to know what's going on.
Also, it's very humbling to say I didn't understand something. It's like it's if you're too proud or something, you might just let the person keep talking. You won't admit to it, right? Yeah.
Right. You want them to think that that it's clear to you when it's not. And sometimes it takes a couple of times. It's like, no, I still don't understand. Then it's like the second time, and you go back, and there's a point when most people just go whatever to themselves. Right. But I think if people paid more attention to listening, our ability to communicate accurately would really be amazing. The difference.
Well, I mean, I guess it's also really hard as a speaker to know what's coming across and what isn't, unless the person is giving you the feedback.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And so on the understanding aspect, is it really the second stage, or it's something that's it's all the other stages are kind of mixed together? Is it like a step by step? Yeah,
the other stages are mixed together.
Right.
They overlap. I think we start with the hearing or attention and end with kind of a response that you make. Although that too can be anywhere in the process. So I think it's best not to think of listening as a linear process. It's iterative, and things keep folding back on depending on the situation. Okay,
really good. Okay, so then can we move on to the next one, or do you have one more thing on understanding that maybe is important?
Understanding is pretty self-explanatory. I'm thinking everybody's understanding what I'm saying.
Right, on paper it's self-explanatory. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're accustomed to understanding what we read, and we're accustomed to having questions asked after we read something in our education in schools. Right. So listening is exactly that. After someone finishes, and if you're new to a job and someone's explaining how to use a piece of equipment or something like that, sometimes you just don't understand, but you don't keep saying, and what order is this in, or where do I get this, or you don't have all the pieces. And often it's hard because you have to know what the other person knows in order to know what to say to them to help them understand. So if you have a lot of background, and I'm assuming you don't, you're probably not listening well, because it's like, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. And that tends to make you kind of daydream instead of listening. On the other hand, if you are clueless, and I assume you've had some background, and I'm explaining it as if you were better prepared, then that's a difficult situation too. So the better able I am to know you and to know something about you, the better able I am to,
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely annoying when someone assumes that like you don't know anything about it and you know more than them, and then
yeah,
you just like, oh, okay. Yeah.
that can be, yeah.
Yeah. Together with the understanding component, is there what you're trying to understand is not just the words, but the intent behind it? Is that kind of the idea that you were going for here as well?
No, actually, I was going for that in that piece I generally put in terms of talking about it into the empathy,
Right.
the interpreting messages. So
Interpreting, right. So that's the next stage. So we'll go there.
the next component, it's HUR. The first R is remembering, and memory is just a totally separate area from listening in most cases. But because those first surveys showed us that when someone didn't remember what was said to them, the person felt very much like they weren't listened to. Like I couldn't have been important to you, or you would have remembered that I, needed next week off for a personal situation. You couldn't have really cared about me if you didn't remember that I am allergic to, peanuts.
Right. So the remembering component is then like certain things during the listening process that you need to hold on to for the future, things that might be important.
Right.
Extractions.
Right. Or promises made. People say, yes, I'll make sure to, and they don't.
Right.
And sometimes the memory for a listener, they don't remember, again, because they're not focusing, they're thinking about themselves. When you meet someone and you're introduced to them, we found conclusively that the reason you don't remember their names, or someone will say, oh, I just never remember names, is because you were never focusing on what was said. You were thinking about what you were going to say next. You were wondering how you were coming across. You were, thinking, I wonder what they're thinking about me, instead of trying to, focus on the person you're meeting, hear what the name is, ask them a question or whatever about themselves. So a lot of times we don't remember because our focus isn't there, and we don't remember because we have sometimes anxiety. So I know my experiences are always about when I'm rushed and I can't find a place and I'm looking for a certain address or something and I think I've gone the wrong direction. I could stop and ask someone, but I can't really remember it because I'm so stressed about needing to know and needing to get somewhere. So stress is really big on remembering as well.
Well, what I really like there is you're not just focusing on remembering, you're focusing on everything that's interfering with it as well. On like if other things go up, then the remembering goes down as well. Right. Yeah, that's really good. Is there anything else on remembering? It seems pretty self-explanatory. Is there more?
Yeah, people can learn memory techniques. There are a lot of books, trade that you really can work at memory and get better at it by incorporating some of the memory strategies. They're all a little superficial and a little really hard to learn at first, but if you're in a position in a job or wherever you are that you really want to improve your memory, it's always good not to throw up your hands and go, I'm just not the kind of person who can remember. It's like, well, you might not be as good as the very best, people who have the very best memory, but you're a long way from where you could be if you worked at it and looked at it. So
yeah. I mean, even if you're sitting with a pen and paper while you're listening to the person, I'm sure it's fine, right?
Right.
It'll help
remember, definitely. Yeah. That's a good point. That that again, people think that people get embarrassed about a number of things. Having to write things down is one of them. Or sometimes people don't like to speak and have somebody write down because they feel like they have to be more careful about what they say. But if it's important, if somebody wants to remember, that's certainly the way to go. And there are different memory systems. Things that we remember for very short term, like telephone numbers that we just keep repeating. And there are other ways to store memory, which I can store memory by making associations and trying to.
Yeah.
And the more you remember, the easier it is to remember new things. And I guess that's the other point that I always thought was interesting, that you think when you're remembering one thing, all the rest of the things in your mind are falling out the other side. But just the opposite is true. When you begin to remember more things, you have more connections and more ways to call it up.
Yeah, I did an interview with Dr. Fergus Craig, and he was talking about that, how like memory is about making connections, and the more connections you make, the more you'll remember. And yeah.
The other interesting, Loftus has done a lot of studies on remembering, on first person in courtrooms, the ability or not to rely on first person observations and memories of what happened. And I think that's fascinating because in a lot of cases, people don't remember what they see and hear. Again, I think it's because of the situation and all of the ways in which they could make assumptions, all the things they hear afterwards that lead them into one direction or another. And,
oh, wow, yeah. Because the assumptions you said come after the remembering, but the assumptions go into the memory if you make them.
Right. So,
So it is interchangeable. It's parallel. It's not sequential.
You make sense of things. So it kind of goes back to understanding a little bit too, but people make sense of things. So, when we do this listening exercise with the elementary school children, which is kind of a telephone, but we have a bathroom, we have a fire escape door, and the fire escape door inevitably becomes a bathroom door. And it's a bathroom door because that's much more in their experience than a fire escape. So as they begin to try to remember, they begin to put in things that are familiar to them rather than the things that actually were said originally.
Yeah.
And different groups put in different things. So it's really, really interesting. Boys will put in different things than girls will when they're 8, 9 years old. So.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Like people have a box and they want to fit things into the box by force rather than making a new box for it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things you touched on earlier that I think is relevant here is also caring leads to remembering, like you said, with that one man that remembers all the names and he does it because he cares. So caring about the person and caring about the conversation and about what's being said also leads to better memory as well.
Right. And your environment, like you were saying before, what we were talking about is that some environments are much more conducive to, your ability to remember. Than others.
Really good. Awesome. Okay. So then after the remembering it's now
there are a lot of parts to this model, but they're all different. And I think, it's easy to see how someone could be very good at one and struggle with another. And that's why it's useful to separate them, even though the process itself combines. The separation helps people see improvement on one or the other.
Right, to see where you're strong, where you're weak, to see where you need to put your attention to. Yeah, really good.
So the interpreting is reading. It's both reading the nonverbal communication of the person that you're speaking to better understand kind of the unstated message, but it's also controlling your own nonverbals and being aware of how you're coming across, because that too will affect their comfort and their sense of your caring. So in the interpreting is, if you were to summarize it, is really about the nonverbal communication, the emotional intelligence, someone's effectiveness at reading nonverbal cues, which again can be, misleading and cultural. We're finding, more and more that there are cultural differences that then we take into. We read it one way out of our own framework, and then sometimes we misread because we're assuming everybody behaves the way we do. But it's your interest in knowing how someone feels. The emotional component of a message is often really important, certainly in healthcare and counseling and coaching. There are a lot of contexts where the emotional component of the message is really the primary part of the message. And not the words.
Right. Where it's just the person just wants to, their intent in talking to you is just to show that they care. They don't really, you can talk about the weather, but you're
Right.
connecting on an emotional level. Right.
Right. And I think that sometimes people too don't realize what nonverbal cues they're displaying. Sometimes I take a mirror, to class and hold the mirror out and say, do you have any idea what I am looking at when I'm talking and watching watching your feedback? What am I, what can I be thinking about how how you're processing what I'm saying when I'm seeing these faces. And certainly you don't want to see people, reading a paper or looking down at their text or their cell phone.
Right.
And in fact, I just did an executive master's program, and it wasn't on, listening was part of it, but we were just talking about the difference now being on Zoom, and they had gotten feedback from their team members, and the piece of feedback that they found most interesting was that they were told that while they didn't think that it was really evident that they were looking down at their cell phone, it was, and that it was really disruptive, but they didn't think it mattered. They didn't think anybody would notice. So I have my cell phone right here. So if I'm expecting a message and I'm talking, but I'm constantly kind of looking down and checking it, I mean, you can see that. And when you don't have much else to go on except, someone's face and eyes, that behavior was really distracting to them. And then again, it made them feel like you didn't really care about what was going on. You weren't present. It's kind of a little bit of mindfulness where you need to be present. You need to not be thinking about what's going to happen in the future, or you can't be, distracted by a message you just got before you came into the encounter. Although you are, so if you are that much, then it would be good to say, look, I really want to talk to you. It's really important to me, but I just got a piece of information that, that I need to respond to. And until I do that, I'm not going to be able to focus. So can we meet again in a half an hour or whatever?
Right.
So I think that those things are also important.
Yeah, really good. Also, on the interpreting thing, whose responsibility is it to make sure that you're getting the message correctly, right? Who's because a lot of miscommunication, this is sort of where it happens, right? It's where like you mean one thing and you say it one way and the person gets something else. Where does that come into play?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, again, it's shared, and sometimes I don't know enough to know that I'm getting the wrong message, and you don't know that you're, as my communication is just so, people want definitive answers to, well, how do I deal with this person? What do I say? How do I respond? And it's like, well, it depends. Depends on your prior relationship. It depends on, all the context of where it's happening, what's appropriate in that situation. It's incumbent upon me as a listener to make sure I get the complete message. And when I think that I might be going astray, then I ask you questions because you don't know that I misunderstood. But as the speaker, and sometimes the responsibility will go naturally with whoever has most stake in having it right. So if I have to really care that it get done correctly, that that my message gets across, then I will probably work harder to make sure that if I want someone to wear a seatbelt, and it's really important to me that they do, then I'm the one who's going to go out of my way to try to motivate them and to give them good reasons and the listeners, but if I need to know something and I'm listening, then asking questions and making sure I get all the pieces correct is.
Yeah. Well, when I'm talking to some people, a lot of them start looking at the implications of what you're saying as well, rather than just what you're saying. And sometimes for me, it's like, no, I'm not implying anything else. It's just this. Does that also come in here into the interpreting? Like people are over-interpreting sometimes? Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good point. And you find it with people who know each other well. That happens also. Is that if there's baggage, especially if there have been prior communications and a husband, wife, or For better or for worse, it happens there. It's kind of the, well, you always, and it's hard to start fresh because the people have all these preconceived notions about what
Right.
you're going to do or how you're going to interpret it, and are looking for things that aren't there. And I think in some ways that's not fair. It's hard not to do it, but it can harm a relationship from being fresh and being productive, because in counseling, particularly, you have to go in with renewed goodwill to make a relationship work.
Yeah. I know I've seen that where it's like, oh, your face looks really good today. Do I look fat?
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
And then sometimes it's all about them just psychologically, if someone's feeling insecure, or if someone, and for the same reasons, they don't ask questions or whatever. And sometimes, you predict things that people are going to do. And one of the things that, I'm not sure where it falls, but one of the things that I've learned that also work really well in terms of everyday applications is that sometimes someone wants to talk. They just have something happen and they really want to talk. And that happens in families a lot, where, a mother will.
I think I cut out again. I think it's me. Is it me that cut out, guys? Can you guys hear me?
Hi, there we are.
Oh, there we are. Was that me that cut out, or was it? I'm trying to remember.
Just cut the whole thing out. I couldn't see either one.
Okay. Okay.
But what I was saying is that sometimes two people have the need to talk, and until they've had a chance to talk, they can't listen effectively. So until I've been able to tell you what I want to tell you, I'm just nodding at anything you say, because I'm really, in my own mind, have this need to tell you. And older adults get that way more than younger people, but everybody does, and particularly when there's a close relationship and it's really important for them to tell you something. So the only way to get around that is for one person just to say, I'm going to listen, and listen well, and I'm going to listen, so that then the other person at least is in a better position to listen to me when I have my turn speaking. But it does, you can see it in application in a lot of situations.
Yeah, no, that's really good, where it's like where something triggers something in the second person and they really want to respond, but the person's not done talking yet. And and so what does the person do in that situation? Does he try to interrupt and interject, or?
I have conversations with people about this quite a bit, because my position is, and it might not be real, it might just be what I think should happen, but I always say, is your idea that important that, in fact, when the other person is finished talking, it's no longer relevant? So, I mean, it's sometimes when people have differences of opinion, or they're arguing about something, and they both just want the other person to be quiet so they can get their point in. And I'm saying, wonder if you don't get that point in. I mean, what really is lost? Because if you listen carefully to what someone says, then maybe they've taken you to a different place. And what you had to say originally is no longer going to be contributing to that conversation. And you're not saying it. I'm not sure that that's a deal breaker. I'm not sure that it ever really was going to be that powerful. So if there was some real insight, the only time that interruptions, I think, are really warranted is again, if you don't understand. It's like, wait, no, if I understand correctly, sometimes
that's a good one then.
really, but if you're interrupting just to get your point in, and somebody else interrupts to get their point in and his point in, you're not open to changing your mind about something. This is going into the E, actually, the next component, which is, assessing your message, evaluating the message, looking at the logic and reasoning. And what we find is that people are just really interested in saying, oh, I know all of this, and I'm really well-versed, and I have all these good reasons, and I want you to hear them all.
Yeah.
And
Well, just
if
to
you
go
got two
back a
people
little bit.
doing that.
Sorry. Yeah, just to ask a little bit more on the interrupting and interjecting thing. For me, where I feel the most that I want to interrupt someone is when they're going on. Are you still with me? Yeah, when they're building some kind of logical. Yeah, when they're building some kind of logical platform, and then like one of the steps is off, and I want to interject and ask about that one step. That's where, for me, it's like I need to. So would that be on the trying to understand better, or the interrupting, or? Are we still there? We're having technical problems.
No, it's trying to understand better. I mean, they want the whole big pick point, and they've got a structure, so I can delve into it a little bit more, because it sounds like it would be something then they could pick up and continue on. So I think that, asking questions, having a point that you make about it, that would be fine, and very different from, just wanting them to hear how smart you are and how much you know about the topic by interjecting your own. And
Okay.
the common thing that I'm sure everybody has heard before is that they're talking about the same topic, and they're showing that they understand what that might mean. It's still taking the focus away from the person who's speaking. So that happens a lot when I had a bad day. Oh, you had a bad day. My bad day. That you try to avoid as much as possible until you want to work through that person's bad day before you go to anything else and take the focus to yourself. But we tend to move the focus to ourselves really quickly.
Yeah. I heard everything you were saying, by the way, about the interjecting. It's just we're having a little bit of technical issues at the moment. I think it's an internet connection thing. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I do notice with a certain type of person is they like to interject when they can show sympathy. Oh, I went through a similar experience than that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're saying is probably not as relevant
Yeah,
in this
you
case?
can
No?
say, I've been, I've been through some, but taking the focus away would be going into great detail about it, to suddenly
Right.
be talking all about your experience.
Right.
That
Hijacking the conversation.
empathy is good to say, I just lost, my dog just got run over by a car. Oh, I know how hard that is. I know how that feels. My cat was hit last week, and I just can't get over it.
Right.
And then go back to them. Don't go, oh yeah, and my cat, it was, his name was Puka, and he was so, we used to, you don't want to take the focus away and then start talking about your situation.
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
So, but
Okay.
the empathy by sharing experiences and by letting them know that you have been there too would be fine.
Right. And so this is all part of the E section is empathy. It's yeah.
Right. And again, men sometimes aren't communicating quite as much empathy facially as what they might think. And empathy is the head nods, the eye contact, the minimal, what we call minimal reinforcers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about it. So those things all contribute to empathy. Being supportive, counselors are good at that. And sometimes it's hard to talk with someone where you don't know what they're thinking. So it brings someone out to non-verbally show empathy. And that's one of the issues that we have too with a very good listener is just have everybody going to them to talk. In organizations, it's Susie, she's really empathic, and when I have a problem, I go to her, but so do the other 20 people.
Right.
So, people seek out people who seem to understand and communicate.
Yeah, it's bizarre too, because like I would think naturally you would go to the person who could solve your problem, but really you go to the person who can listen. It doesn't matter if they can solve your problem or not. Yeah.
Right. You do. You go to the person who can listen, and sometimes sometimes if you are afraid the person who could solve your problem is going to make a judgment about you, then you avoid going to them, and then the problem doesn't get solved.
Right.
And in counseling, if you've got a trained listener, they can help you think through your problem and try to help you develop some solutions or some strategies.
Yeah, really good. And then the R, I guess, is responding, which is at the end, and it's the least important part, I guess, but it's also important to just show that you've heard the person.
Right, and I think we've been, mentioning it throughout that
Right.
That's the way that anybody judges whether or not they've been heard, is how you respond, both verbally and non-verbally. So,
Right.
And I think as I said, it's a real compliment to have someone listen, because time is so valuable nowadays, and so if someone takes the time to listen, shows that they care enough about the speaker to listen, and it's really hard to develop a close relationship if you are surrounded by people who aren't spending enough time with you to really understand.
Really great. Yeah. Okay. So before we wrap this up, I want to just ask about how the model was received and what's the status of it today.
I'm just amazed at how it has held up over years. There are other really good listening textbooks on the market, but in terms of an approach, a systematic approach, this is still, I think, the tightest approach. And I get emails and calls every week or so for someone who either wants to use the model, or someone who wants to do research on the model, or so. And my most recent edition of the textbook is its sixth edition, which was 2018. And I wouldn't be surprised, but when we do another one, seventh edition, I updated ethics, the ethics of listening, technology and listening, diversity and listening, and some of the themes that I've tried to put in to the newer editions. But I think that there are probably people out there who bought the book and go, I can't do this. but if it gives you a place to start, and it's very flexible, and you can adapt it to your particular situation, and you can really see outcomes. Students can see outcomes. So I think students have benefited from it. They can see that they've benefited from it. It can be combined with more philosophical, thought-provoking kinds of questions too, but it's very experiential. So that too, I think students and faculty both appreciate, is that it gives you a lot of cool things to do in the classroom. But it is, it's less theoretical than, it requires less of a supplement with outside readings. So, you can use it in a wide range of ways.
Yeah, really good. Okay, and you're going to send me a bunch of links to your textbook and to a website. Well, I'll put them in, and I'll give a description on what it is. Yeah.
Okay. The last thing I'd like to say before we is one of the ways in which I've been using listening a lot lately is with servant leadership, which is a leadership philosophy and behavior that really depends on listening. So the premise is that leaders listen to find out what organizational members need, and then empower them and provide the resources. And I think that that's the wave of the future, particularly in service organizations and healthcare organizations. And listening certainly plays a big role, because I think that one person listening can really start a wave of a culture that changes to become much more of what we call listening environment. So I think if one person improves their listening in any kind of group dynamic, that you want to feel like you can really have an impact, a positive impact.
Oh, really good. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask anyways if there was anything, a main takeaway or something like this that we can get from listening. And I think really it's just what you were talking at the beginning. It's about caring about the other person is more, probably the one thing that sort of ties it all together, no?
Right, and getting to know them, knowing them well enough to be able to, manage the communication process. But yeah, caring is central.
Right.
You hear words, but that doesn't always give you the meaning and doesn't give you the context. And everyone is different, and I think we need to appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, really great. Thank you so much, Dr. Judy Brownell, for coming and sharing your wisdom with us, and for sure.
Well, it's been fun, and thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Yeah, and for all your contributions to the field and everything. It's really great that everything you've done. So yeah, so I'll put the links in the description.
Okay.
And we had a couple of questions. Just one of them here was just if you like Dr. Young. If you like
Yeah,
Young.
yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
It's been a long time since I've used Young. We use Carl Rogers more
Right.
with the listening. For sure.
Right. Great. Okay. Well, thank you again. Have a good one, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.